We are following breaking news out of the Inner Harbor where a massive group has gathered, and we're hearing reports of multiple fights.
Now, you can see the scene right now on the left side of your screen. You can also see people and flashing lights from police.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Mary Bubala.
I'm Kai Jackson. Fox 45 News has multiple crews on the scene right now. Let's begin with Keith Daniels. Keith, you've been down there for a few minutes at least, and we've got Vincent Hill standing by as well. What are you seeing? What are you hearing has happened there?
Well, Kai, we're live on Pratt Street at Commerce Street. Now, look behind me. Several police officers here at this corner, and then look across the street here. Several groups of youth standing here. I can tell you when we got here about 30 minutes ago, so many more youth, so many more police officers here, but the crowd seemingly dispersed just a bit. Police had their sirens revving up, trying to get this group dispersed. Now, police said they got the call at about 9:23 today, reports of large groups gathering. As a precaution, we're told that police were dispatched to this location to monitor the crowds on the scene. Again, several police cars parked here. They're positioned in place, but they tell us so far no injuries and no arrests. Now, I know initially we had reports that there were fights here, but on the scene here, police officers are telling me they saw no fights, just large groups of people disrupting the area. Now, I can tell you, they did tell some of these businesses, we're live out front of Shake Shack, Chick-fil-A. Those businesses were told to close. Police officers telling them it's better if they shut down. For now, though, again, no arrest and no injuries to report. Just a chaotic scene. Back to you.
And Keith, we're going to stay with you for just a moment. Are police saying what their process is at this point? I mean, we're in spring break. There are a lot of families who have traveled to Baltimore for a nice spring break, and this has created a scene of chaos. Yes, it's young people gathering, not doing much harm, but creating some instability in the area. So are police just standing by and standing down at this point?
Mary, you're looking at what we see. See the police officers standing there monitoring the situation. I'm told by the police spokesperson that that's what they were told to do, come here and monitor the situation. Now, again, they did have their sirens blaring before. I'm told that was kind of like a deterrent to try to get the crowds dispersed. And look over there, that's the Renaissance Hotel. When we got here, we saw people coming and going in that Renaissance Hotel. So you're right, Mary, people are down here for food. People are down here going into their hotels, and they're faced with all of this. I can tell you again, when we first got here about 30 minutes ago, oh boy, lots and lots of people here, crowds, larger crowds of young people, but that since then the crowd has pretty much dispersed. We still have some young people over here. I was talking to some of them earlier. Some of them say they are Baltimore City school children. They're on spring break, but again, they tell me no one is creating any type of, breaking any kind of laws here, simply gathered. But it was chaotic when we got here. People yelling, people running, and of course, police here to keep order.
And so, Keith, what's the mood there right now? And I don't know, do you feel like your camera right now being there is that fueling a lot of the activity by the young people?
That's a good question, Kai. Earlier, that probably would have been the case, but then we have just young people doing what they do when they see a camera. They want to be on television, so they do walk up wanting to be on television, but in terms of disrupting the scene here or encouraging them to act out, I don't think that's the case. Many of them, like this couple, like these folks, they're walking across the street. They're walking over there to their friends, minding their own business. Some of them come by, they look in the camera. You know how they do. They get in front of the camera, they say, "Hi, Mom," and all of that kind of thing. But again, I don't think the camera is causing the chaos here. Earlier, it was just a bunch of youth gathered here. And again, we're told police were deployed to this location to monitor the situation.
All right, Keith, reporting. We'll come back to you in a little bit. For now, we're going to go to Vincent Hill. Vincent, you are live in the area and you live in the area. What have you been seeing? I know you heard reports maybe they were going to use tear gas or whatnot.
Thank you. Okay, hey.
Yeah, Mary, let me step out of the way so you can see the crowd that we're looking at from this angle. It's still a very active crowd here now. I've been watching this all unfold since about 8:50 from my apartment building. Just a few minutes ago, I spoke to two women that are staying in the Renaissance Hotel. They're here for spring break. They actually said they witnessed a fight from their room on the 10th floor, and that's when this crowd started here. And to Keith's point, since we've been out here, every time we've been here with the camera, juveniles have come up to us trying to get on camera. We're still waiting to figure out what BPD's strategy will be to disperse this crowd. I know the helicopter was up originally. That just left about 10 to 15 minutes ago. So we're still waiting on BPD's response to this to see exactly how they will disperse this large crowd that is still pretty active here at Pratt and South Street, Mary.
Yeah, and Vincent, you mentioned people being on spring break. You talked to a couple. Mary mentioned the fact that it's spring break. Are you getting a sense that anybody visiting Baltimore perhaps feels unsafe because of this kind of situation?
Well, Kai, I can tell you, standing here by the Renaissance Motel, of course, I've seen people enter the parking lot and come out in disbelief as to what's going on. So there are a lot of people here that are in town for spring break. There's a concert apparently going on. The two women I talked to said their kids were at a concert. They were actually scared to walk to the concert to pick up their 15-year-olds while they're here in town.
And Vince, let's just talk about the use of police resources for something like this. Again, critics say this is just young kids down there. You guys are making a big deal out of it. They're not doing anything. It's their spring break as well. But I listened to the scanner for almost an hour and a half, and police resources are really taxed for situations like this when we have crime in other parts of the city that need attention.
Yeah, Mary, I mean, at the end of the day, this is a disturbance here in downtown Baltimore. And we talked earlier today about a police shortage. So now that's coming into full effect. There's not enough police officers here to disperse this large crowd, Mary.
Oh, that's interesting. All right, Vincent, stay where you are. We'll check back in with you later in the newscast. And stay with Fox 45 News as we continue to follow this breaking situation, keep you updated both air and online.
Yeah, Mary, we just want to point out real quick while you have a moment, this is, Vincent kind of alluded to it, this is one of the things that we have seen in the past. There have been some disturbances in Fells Point. Yes. Baltimore police kind of mobilized there. And I recall from going down there, you've been to Fells Point for a number of months, actually. Police had barricades up, trying to funnel traffic in Fells Point and out of one way. There were times when a lot of the young kids who like to ride dirt bikes came through there. People felt unsafe. But it was an inconvenience for people coming and visiting because it was hard to move around. It was hard to park. And so we certainly hope that kind of thing doesn't materialize downtown. That's kind of like the heart of the city.
Absolutely. And also, this is also evidence of there is not enough for young people to do. In our city, you know that people have been calling for rec centers, and not necessarily that a crowd wants to go to a rec center at the start of their spring break, but this is where they go.
This is where they go when they don't have things to do. The malls that we grew up with are pretty much gone. This is one of the things they're doing. All right. So in the meantime, we're going to continue to cover this story throughout the newscast periodically. So please don't go anywhere. Fox 45 News is following as well tonight the fallout from the bombshell report from the Maryland Attorney General's office, which sheds light on the decades of abuse allegations inside the Baltimore Archdiocese. In fact, it lists more than 100 accused abusers and 600 victims.
And just hours after that report was released today, state lawmakers passed a bill making it easier for sex abuse victims to get justice.
And tonight we're taking a closer look at that legislation, the church cover-up, and we're hearing from victims.
I'm feeling very, very sad because who in hell would want to be excited about this horrible stuff that's going to be in these papers?
Team coverage begins tonight with Maxine Stryker and a closer look at what's in the report.
The report is a lot to get through, 456 pages to be exact, and most of them very difficult to read. More than 100 clergy members mentioned and hundreds more victims, and perhaps the most scathing thing is the lengths that the Archdiocese went to cover up this scandal.
Today, certainly in Maryland, is a day of reckoning and a day of accounting.
The Maryland Attorney General's office launched a grand jury investigation into the Archdiocese of Baltimore in 2018, examining criminal allegations of child sexual abuse by clergy. Today, 5 years later, that report was finally released.
The incontrovertible history uncovered by this investigation is one of pervasive, pernicious, and persistent abuse by priests and other Archdiocese personnel.
Attorney General Anthony Brown says they received documents dating back to the 1940s that uncovered a long and sordid history of abuse.
What was consistent throughout the stories was the absolute authority and power these abusive priests and the church leadership held over survivors, their families, and their communities.
The report details 156 abusers and over 600 child victims. It says abusers often singled out children who were isolated and vulnerable and preyed upon them, telling their victims the abuse was God's will and no one would doubt the word of a priest.
It's also a history of repeated cover-up of that abuse by the Catholic Church hierarchy.
Most shocking may be the history of repeated dismissal by the Catholic Church hierarchy dating back decades. According to the report, the abuse was only possible because of the complicity of those charged with leading the church, who focused not on protecting victims or stopping abuse, but rather on ensuring at all costs the abuse be kept hidden. In 1968, the report says Cardinal Sheehan was told by a father that parish priest Albert Julian was sexually abusing his daughter. Julian even admitted to the abuse and confessed to uncontrollable attraction to young girls and yielding to temptation, but the abuse never reported. The Archdiocese instead got him psychiatric treatment and reassigned him to other parish work. And in 1987, the Archdiocese learned that Brother Thomas Roshowitz had sexually abused a 14-year-old girl. The church's response was to tell the victim he would get therapy and be reassigned away from children. But there's no indication that ever happened. And during the next 7 years, 9 women reported he abused them at St. Michael Church in Baltimore. The stories of cover-up by church leaders go on and on. And according to the report, in rare cases when sexual abuse was prosecuted, the judicial system and the press colluded with the church to avoid transparency and accountability. Unfortunately, most of the abusers are dead or no longer subject to prosecution, according to Brown, so it may be too late for criminal justice.
We hope that exposing the Archdiocese's transgressions to the fullest extent possible will bring some measure of accountability and perhaps encourage others to come forward.
The Archdiocese of Baltimore, Archbishop William Lori, posting a lengthy statement to their website today, apologizing to the victims and detailing changes that they have made when it comes to ending sexual abuse. But it's also important to note, while the Archdiocese of Baltimore did not oppose the release of this report, it's been reported that they paid the legal fees for a group seeking to seal the proceedings of this report. In Baltimore, Maxine Stryker.
This report is nearly 500 pages long, so we want to give you a closer look at some of the other standout sections like this one. The report says church documents show the Archdiocese was, quote, more concerned with avoiding scandal and negative publicity than it was with protecting children. The report goes on to talk about how deep-rooted sex abuse was within the Archdiocese, calling the huge number of abusers and victims and abusers' actions right there astonishing. Another section talks about how the abuse was possible, saying it's because leaders were complicit, saying they failed to protect its faithful. And finally, the report claims church leaders failed to act even when they were told about the abuse and would sometimes try to, quote, quash such reports.
As we mentioned, the Maryland Attorney General's office, or the General Assembly, passed the Child Victims Act of 2023, ending the statute of limitations on civil cases of child abuse. That bill is now headed to the governor's desk for his signature. Fox 45's Jeff Abel is live right now with more on that bill and what it means for survivors. Jeff?
Well, you know, right now, Maryland law prevents abuse victims who are over the age of 38 from suing their abusers. But it appears all that is about to change.
It's better. It's really better than I ever imagined it feeling.
Carolyn Zurich joined other abuse victims today to celebrate a legislative victory they once feared may never arrive.
And you can work every day and you can try to be whole and you can try to not be broken. But until you actually are able to say out loud and have people hear and have people understand what happened, you actually can't, like, start being alive.
Survivors of abuse watched today as Maryland's House of Delegates passed the Child Victims Act, a measure which removes the statute of limitations and allows survivors to sue their abusers at any time.
It seems that certain institutions are valuing money over souls.
The measure brought a passionate debate on the House floor led by Delegate C.T. Wilson, a child sex abuse survivor himself.
This bill is not going to undo anything that happened to me or any of the victims. It's not going to make you whole. You can't. I just want these people to understand that you are heard. You are not alone.
For the last 20 years, we've been trying to pass this legislation, and the church held sway over the legislative process down in Annapolis.
But today, the House passed the measure by a vote of 132 to 2. The Senate passed the measure last month. This afternoon, abuse survivors and their attorneys predicted sweeping change.
I'm hoping that will prompt other people who have been in the shadows. Their example will bring those people forward.
In our economy, money talks, and the only way that children are really going to be safe is if institutions know that they will have to pay.
But at the end of the day, my hope is to save someone else the life sentence.
The measure is now headed to the governor, who has indicated he does plan to sign it. We're live tonight. Jeff Abel, Fox 45 News.
Still ahead on Fox 45 News at 10 o'clock tonight. A violent start to April has Fox 45 News demanding answers about what city leaders are doing to keep residents safe. We press Mayor Brandon Scott on his summer crime plan. New reaction tonight to the indictment of former President Donald Trump. We look into the case against him and what to expect in the months ahead. Also, after the break, getting students to stay in school is becoming an issue in Baltimore City. Project Baltimore investigates absenteeism in the city and what's being done about it. And as we go to break right now, we're looking live at the Inner Harbor. Fox 45's Keith Daniels and Vincent Hill down at the harbor right around Pratt Street, where we've seen large groups of young people. A bit of a chaotic scene down there tonight, and Baltimore police trying to disperse the crowd, which has been a little rowdy. Fox 45 is following this story. We'll have an update coming up.
And we continue to follow our breaking news. A disturbance down at the Inner Harbor at Pratt Street. Police have been there for well over an hour.
On increase in chronic absenteeism during the 2021-2022 school year from the previous year. Throughout the state, 24% of Maryland students were chronically absent, nearly a quarter of all state students. That's up from 19.7% the year before.
Schools are a critical place for socialization.
Following the pandemic, Chang says chronic absenteeism increased nationwide because many students and families became disengaged. She says schools need to hire more staff to re-engage those families and conduct home visits.
You're saying the only way to lower chronic absenteeism is for schools to get more proactive.
Absolutely. This is an all hands on deck moment in time.
I'm Chris Pabst, and this is Project Baltimore.
Fox 45 News, keeping our eye on the breaking news in the Inner Harbor. A massive crowd gathered there, 300 to 400 young people, and we hear of reports of fighting. Stay with us. We'll keep you updated on this throughout the night.
And we are under weather alert for the potential of severe storms coming Thursday afternoon. A marginal risk of severe weather, level 1 of 5. That has moved the Orioles game now to Friday, and for first pitch actually looks okay. 61, mostly cloudy skies and cooler. You may even need a jacket by the end of that game. We're tracking those severe storms that are moving through tomorrow. It's in my Weather Authority forecast.
Fox 45 is following breaking news out of the Inner Harbor, where a massive and rowdy crowd gathered tonight, and a lot of them are still out there right now, although police have been trying to disperse them. Now, we have heard reports of fights and businesses asked to close early, like Shake Shack and also Chick-fil-A. So far, police say there have been no major injuries or arrests at this time, but we have heard reports and seen them handing out citations. Stay with Fox 45 News as we continue to follow this developing story.
And we're following the breaking news out of the Inner Harbor tonight, where a massive group of young people gathered, and we're hearing reports of multiple fights.
You can see on the left side of your screen, there are still a lot of people out there. Baltimore police are still out there as well with flashing lights and police cars posted around, watching what's going on. But we understand not really making arrests, but definitely trying to disperse this crowd.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Mary Bubala.
I'm Kai Jackson. We have multiple crews on the scene right now. Let's begin with Fox 45's Keith Daniels. Keith, any updates for us?
Kai, yes, sir. We're live here at Commerce Street and Pratt Street. It's totally settled down here. Police, of course, still here, standing by, monitoring the crowd. But look across the street here. The crowd pretty much dispersed earlier. There were several large groups of young people here. Many of them say they're on spring break. They gathered here. Not sure why so many people came to this location. Some police officers on the scene tell me that perhaps there were young people in the crowd who used social media to alert everybody to come down here to this location. But again, police are telling us no reports of injuries, no reports of arrests, but they were dispatched to this location at about 9:23 tonight to, quote, monitor the circumstances. Now look over here to the left. You see several businesses, including Shake Shack. Police say that they did ask those businesses to close because at one time, Mary and Kai, a very large group of youth in this location. So as a precaution, they did ask those businesses to close. But I can tell you at this moment, at this time, things have settled down dramatically. The crowd's pretty much dispersed, but police still on the scene here. Now, our colleague Vincent Hill is standing by in the area. Let's go now to him to get an update where he is. Vincent.
As you said, it does look like the crowds are dispersed. What about traffic? Did any of this hold up traffic along Pratt Street or even Lombard, which is to your right?
It's funny you say that, Kai. I'm sorry, I thought Vincent was going next, but let me get this question. Look here, the traffic, the cars are moving through. Police have now opened Commerce Street. They're turning left here on Pratt Street, so traffic is moving here smoothly. At one point, though, this street was shut down. Commerce Street was shut down. Police did have this street blocked off, but again, now it's open. Let's get out of the street now. You can see this car coming here. This one lane, at least in this direction, is open to go down Pratt, but again, closed in the direction going further into downtown.
All right, Keith, thank you. Stand by. We'll come back to you. For right now, we're going to go to former federal prosecutor Thuru Vignarajah. He is joining us in studio to talk about a couple of things tonight. But Thuru, one of them is the report out about the abusers in the Archdiocese of Baltimore. But before we talk about that, let's talk a little bit about what we've seen downtown tonight. Not a total crisis situation, yet police resources are being used for at least 2 hours now to just try to disperse a very large crowd of young people. Do you agree with how police are handling this situation, just sort of standing their ground?
Yeah, look, this is hard because we know these circumstances can escalate, sometimes escalate quickly and boil over into very serious violence. Last summer, you'll recall that there was a crowd like this that resulted in a double shooting, one of them fatal by a young man with a gun. And so in a crowd like this, you always worry about that. At the same time, from the scenes that we've seen so far, it's a little hard to tell whether the situation was chaotic or whether the response was chaotic. And I think we all worry that sort of city leadership doesn't have a good approach to handling and de-escalating these circumstances. And I think that the strapped resources that we already have only get made worse by circumstances like this.
Yes. Thuru, what do you think the balancing act here is? Mary had a good point. Kids are on spring break. We understand they want to go out and be out, but there's a balancing act between being out, being responsible, and being of proper age to be out. We shouldn't have like 10 and 11-year-olds out. But if you're 17, 18 years old out, 20 years old, we understand that. But what's the balancing act between going out but also being responsible?
Yeah, you know, I think you're exactly right. I mean, we knew that this was going to happen because it's spring break. There aren't a lot of opportunities for what these young people can do at 7, 8, 9 p.m. And if they're out at 7, 8, 9 p.m., they're still out often at 10 and 11 p.m. So part of it is making sure that we prepare for spring break, making sure that there are things that these young men and women can do. And at the same time, engaging in traditional crowd control. You know, when a Ravens game gets out, after an Orioles win, we have large crowds and we have a police presence, but we don't need to use tear gas and sirens to disperse and de-escalate. So sometimes the reaction is what's fueling the problem, when in fact, if we had done just proper preparation, we could have gotten this situation under control before it escalated.
All right, let's talk about the bombshell report that was released today about the Archdiocese of Baltimore and the abuse in there. More than 100 abusers in the Archdiocese. You wrote an op-ed about this not long ago, and we first learned about the report back in November. Why do you think it took so long for them to release it?
I mean, look, it has been very frustrating to watch the Catholic Church's reaction to this horrific chapter in their history. You know, this dates back to the Second World War, hundreds of victims, hundreds of perpetrators, and perhaps as bad as all of that is, the fact that the church was complicit, that they covered it up, that they systematically over decades decided to side with the perpetrators of this abuse of children instead of trying to protect the children themselves. It's really horrific, and the only hope is that out of this moment of reckoning, that victims and survivors who have felt that they've been silenced can come forward, that they feel comfortable contacting people. As an advocate for victims' rights in a lot of contexts, you gotta hope that people will suddenly feel some measure of comfort from knowing that they were not alone and that they can safely come forward today.
Through a lot of what's in that report, and we showed it today, is redacted. So you don't know the names. You know the names of some of the priests, but not all of them and not all of the information. That kind of redacting is why people don't trust institutions, whether it's the church, whether it's the court system, or whether it's legislatures and those in charge of enforcing the law. And what reason do people have to trust these entities, these institutions in the future when this much information is redacted and we know people were abused for decades, children?
I mean, give credit to Attorney General Brian Frosh and now Anthony Brown for spearheading this effort to bring as much to the surface as they possibly could. Now we have to rely on the court system to take the next step, to make sure that there is accountability. The church has to be held accountable. The individuals that enabled and facilitated this have to be held accountable. And that does require survivors to come forward. You got to hope and pray that some of them will have the courage to do what others have already done.
All right, Dhruv Vignarajah, Dhruv, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, April has started off violent in Baltimore. 5 people have been killed in the first 5 days of the month. Fox 45's Mackenzie Frost presses Mayor Brandon Scott on preventing a crime spike from becoming a trend.
The mayor says the city will continue to utilize other agencies like Monzi and other law enforcement to help get a handle on the violence. The mayor's also pushing lawmakers to do more in Annapolis, but we pushed him on why he's not calling for that work to happen even quicker. Overnight, a 15-year-old hit by a stray bullet coming through her window, adding to the growing list of non-fatal shootings in the city. Homicides and non-fatals are down when looking at this time last year, but when diving deeper into the data, 26 people were killed in Baltimore this January. That's 10 less than January 2022. But in 2021, 27 people were killed, nearly the same number of victims of violence as this year. And now more and more young people finding themselves in the crossfire. Mayor Brandon Scott says he's focusing on giving them options.
We're going to make sure that we have activities for our young people.
And utilizing the community violence intervention ecosystem like Safe Streets and the group violence reduction strategy to curb the surge in bloodshed. So is the CVI the city's summer crime strategy?
No, the crime strategy, again, every year, Mackenzie, we have these discussions. The strategy is always the strategy.
Mayor Scott not really saying more.
We're never going to talk about that publicly because people that commit crimes in Baltimore watch the news as well, but know that the partnership that we have between myself, State's Attorney Ivan Bates, with our Attorney General Anthony Brown, with our U.S. Attorney Eric Brown, with the Police Commissioner, with our Governor, we're going to work each and every day.
When you talk about that partnership with Ivan Bates, have you been working with Have you lobbied the lawmakers in Annapolis to get his legislation passed as one bill that he's been pushing for?
Well, we know that everyone knows that I support the bill, right? You were the first person to hear me say that directly.
The mayor says he has his own priority for lawmakers in Annapolis, targeting notification for parole and probation violators.
We have our own bill that we think will help us reduce violence in Baltimore.
Why not use your position to call that out then?
Well, we have. That's what
Where?
we do in Annapolis. If you go and see, you can look at the testimony.
5 days left. Are you going to hold a news conference to push for this?
We're going to do everything, right? We're going to talk directly with those legislators, right? And if you do a story, Mackenzie, maybe we'll get more citizens involved in that as well as we have already.
Well, let me know when you hold a news conference. We'll be there.
The mayor moving on to his next thing, while the crime problem persists outside the walls of City Hall. And the mayor is running out of time to push for what he says could help save lives in the halls of the State House.
The bill backed by State's Attorney Ivan Bates has yet to pass both chambers. And lawmakers in Annapolis will work right up until midnight on Monday. In the newsroom, Mackenzie Frost, Fox 45 News.
A Senate committee is considering attaching the city state's attorney's bill to another bill. They had a hearing on it tonight. It is expected to come to a vote tomorrow morning.
Well, the Frederick County Sheriff refusing to step aside after being federally indicted on charges related to the sale of guns.
And some topsy-turvy weather coming. We've delayed the Orioles game, of course, for tomorrow with rain and thunderstorms. Weather alert day, a warm one, though, with highs in the mid-80s and then temperatures all over the place Friday into Saturday. Could have used some jackets into the weekend. I'll let you know how it holds into Sunday for Easter in my Weather Authority forecast.
To follow the breaking news down at the harbor tonight, a large disorderly group there tonight. We will have a live report coming up.